Hello, YouTube Nation. This is Tony Sheree, and this video that I want to do, I had to wait a while so I can actually process my emotions on this particular issue because this person meant a lot to me. So this video, I'm going to do a video on my thoughts on Ozzy Osbourne. So I'm gonna have to take you back to where I actually got into Ozzy Osbourne and kind of what he actually meant to me as a performer. So we're gonna have to take the Wayback Machine back to the 1980s. Ozzy Osbourne just released his second studio album called Diary of a Madman, and it was really good. There were some really good songs on there. Uh, One of the songs that really sticks into me was Flying High Again, Over the Mountain. There was just some really good songs on that album. And I bought the album on cassette, listened to it, loved it. And shortly after that album came out, their guitarist Randy Rhoads passed in a weird plane accident. And that was kind of weird because right off the bat of just getting into that first album that I knew of Ozzy Osbourne, their guitarist was taken away from us. And it's kind of one of the first times I actually had to deal with something like that. But they decided they were going to sojourn on, and the next album they did after that was Bark at the Moon, which brought Jakey Lee into the band. And to me, Bark at the Moon was fantastic because the title track itself was just amazing. Listen and it just really cemented the fact that this is a good musician, Ozzy Osbourne, you know. So I started actually getting into this stuff. Uh, and then I kind of went back to the first album that he did, Blizzard of Oz, which had the great Crazy Train on there. And from then on, I was pretty well hooked on this gentleman's craft going forward. So, Bark at the Moon leads into the Ultimate Sin, and I love that album. It had a weird feel to me because it just kind of felt like there was a little bit more pop into it, but some of the stuff was actually pretty direct. The song Ultimate Sin is actually quite thought provoking, and a lot of Ozzy Osbourne stuff is pretty well thought provoking. It makes you kind of think a little bit, you know. The stuff on The Ultimate Sin, even though it had a weird kind of like tried to be a little bit on the glam side, it still made you think. And that's one thing that I really did love about Ozzy Osbourne. Crazy Train, it does kind of make you think a little bit. Uh, there's a lot of his stuff that just kind of makes you want to open up your brain cells a little bit and actually explore a little bit, you know. And of course, tongue in cheek, Flying High Again. Well, you know, if you're into the 420 stuff, you know, Flying High Again is kind of your go-to anthem whenever you're firing up the devil's lettuce, if you will. So I followed along, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, Jakey Lee's out of the band, and they brought in this other musician called Zach Wild to actually fill out, and he actually did an album with him, and I thought that album was pretty good. But I was into some other things at the time. I kind of like just picked little parts of it out that I kind of liked, but it really never did grab my attention too much as being an album I had to listen to all over and over again. It happens. But then he released this album called No More Tears. He got a little, you know, tried his hand at being sober and actually did that album sober. And it was phenomenal. You have songs like No More Tears, Mr. Tinker Train, I Don't Want to Change the World, Mama, I'm Coming Home. You know, the whole entire album is just chock full of good songs. And I'm leaving the last one kind of like this little bit, the Road to Nowhere was another great song. Uh, but I'm leaving the last song as kind of like what my life was going to be from that moment on. The song is called Hellraiser, and it kind of dictated to me what my life was going to be from that moment on. I was, going town to town for rock and roll. Even though I'm not in a band, I'm a fan. It kind of became my mantra because I've been to concerts all over the freaking world. I've been to freaking London. I've been to freaking, you know, uh, New York. I've been to Minneapolis. I've been to Chicago. I've been to a lot of different cities, around the world just so I can see these wonderful metal and rock and roll shows. So that song to me just kind of spelled out what my life was going to be. And I loved that album. And I was just like so in love with it. I just kept, and they did a live concert from it called Live and Loud. I must have freaking drove the neighbors crazy with that because I just cranked that son of a bitch all the way up to freaking 10 and just let it go and just freaking just jam out to this mother because I love the live stuff. I was kind of into the live music my whole entire life. I thought that was the ultimate way of actually experiencing it. So that happened. Then he had a few other albums called Osmosis and Scream, and he just kept putting out these albums that just had these really just punch good hook laden, music. And of course, at this particular time, I had to kind of reverse engineer things because, well, he was in this band called Black Sabbath. And I was in my late 20s before I realized this. And I knew the band Black Sabbath existed, but I never did put two and two together that it was Ozzy Osbourne. So I started going back and started kind of discovering some of the stuff he did with Black Sabbath, songs like Paranoid, uh, Sweetleaf, all that other cool stuff. And then I come to realize through my diligent kind of exploration of all these of this music that Sabbath was the actual band that actually started this heavy metal movement that I love so well. And right then and there, Ozzy became kind of this weird figure in my life that I'm like, okay, I can pinpoint now who actually invented this genre of music that I love. The band was Black Sabbath, and the lead singer was Ozzy Osbourne. And now I have a band to actually put to the music I love. And for me, that was just a magical epiphany because I'm like, oh, wow. Because, there were some bands that came pretty close. You had like MC5 that kind of had a kind of a metal thing here and there. Deep Purple did it. You had bands like Led Zeppelin that kind of somewhat did it, but they were kind of close. Bands like The Who kind of fluttered in that deal, but they never really did get there. Jimi Hendrix, of course, the great Jimi Hendrix, kind of went there. But when Sabbath actually had that first album out, first song out of the gate is called Black Sabbath. And it starts out with church bells ringing in the back, with rain falling. And you're just like, oh, okay, that's cool. Then all of a sudden they start this diatribe chord structure. Bow, 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 wow, wow, wow. And you're just like, oh, this is something different. And then all of a sudden they have Ozzy Osbourne just go into this really soulful thing, with the special effects that they got, the rain and stuff like that in the background kind of subsiding, and all of a sudden you hear him do this thing. Then about halfway through the song, heavy metal officially begins with that jam, that freaking Tony Iommi drum and everything, and all of a sudden Ozzy Osbourne comes in, and it just becomes a full formed metal jam. And the rest of Black Sabbath's career was basically founded upon that freaking premise of that, that angst, that guitar, the voice and stuff like that. So for me, that was just a special band. And I just listened to Ozzy Osbourne, and I finally got to see him in concert for the first time in, I think, 2006 or something like that. He had an album out, and I saw him for the first time as a solo performer at the Sprint Center in Kansas City, which is now the T-Mobile. And I walked away from that going, yeah, he's it. Yeah, okay. Then I saw him another time uh, at he had a cancellation, so he decided at the last moment that he's actually just going to do an impromptu show with the same tour at the Sandstone Amphitheater, which is now called the Azura, and that show was fantastic. And then I saw him again another two times, I think, or maybe one time, uh, doing an Ozfest thing. I have to realize at the time I didn't have the money to go to so many shows, so I kind of had to be kind of picky on what I went to. I can only go to about 4 or 5 shows a year, and I had to kind of be picky. I didn't want to freaking. I have to eat. So I'd done seen Ozzy Osbourne 3 times, and I'm just like every time I saw him was just like a wonderful experience. You get into his music, and you're just like you're in that pocket, and he just makes you just go. As my friend Ozzy Osbourne would say, go crazy. So I had that as kind of like a guiding post, and I just had this utmost admiration for Ozzy Osbourne. Like I said, a lot of his stuff actually kind of makes you think a little bit. That's one thing that heavy metal does. It kind of makes you kind of think about things a little bit. It's just not a music of empty calories. And I think because that music has that quality that kind of makes you think a little bit, it kind of makes you think, and it makes you a little bit more appreciative of things. There's kind of been some studies saying that metalheads are kind of some of the happiest people in the world because they kind of know the world around them. They want to change it. And they're not satisfied just saying, oh, going along with the flow of things. They actually enjoy the music they're listening to. If you ever been to a metal concert, it's just one of the greatest experiences of your life. People are there, they're having fun. The music's just getting everybody going. So fast forward, he did the last concert in Birmingham. And of course, I've seen most of it. I had to kind of rearrange my schedule to see it because it was going on at a time I'm usually supposed to be sleeping. But I saw it and I thought it was just so beautiful the way they did it. I think they could have had a few more bands. I think they could have probably had a whole entire 2-day festival over this thing. But the way they did it was just beautiful. And Ozzy Osbourne got to sing songs from his solo career with the guitarist and musicians that he did with his solo career, but then they ended up with, 3 or 4 songs that he did as his as Black Sabbath at the tail end, where it all began, how metal began. And I saw that, even though you have to give him credit for how he did it because he decided he wanted his voice to be good. So instead of actually being on all his medications that he was on, he decided he was going to kick all the medications. Everything was gone. Even though he was going to feel like crap, he could actually still sing. His voice was going to be good enough to go. And it was an emotional night. And then I'm in Chicago seeing a band called The Warning, and I hear on the radio that Ozzy Osbourne passed away just only 17 days after that. And that just kind of put me on this kind of thought process and appreciation for what he did for me. I have to admit something. I don't know what I become in life if it weren't for Ozzy Osbourne and heavy metal music. That music has been my constant companion my whole entire life. Ever since I got into heavy metal music, it's always been there. And to have this guy who, for the better word, actually invented this genre of music I love so much, not with me anymore, it's kind of sad. And it took me a while to actually try to find the words to actually express on here without getting emotional. And I just want to actually thank Ozzy Osbourne for what he did for my life. He gave me the musical direction that I was going to be on for the most part of it. I do enjoy other forms of music. I do like some pop stuff. I do like some country stuff. But for the most part, I'm a metalhead. And I'm good with that. I can live with being a metalhead. I got into a lot of bands. In fact, one of the newer bands I'm actually kind of pushing right now is a band called The Warning. They're three sisters. I've done videos about them already. But I got into bands like Disturbed. I got into bands like Iron Maiden. I got into bands like Korn, Slipknot. The you know the list is just endless of all the bands I got to go see live. That for the You have to admit they don't exist without Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath. You know, they were that first band that said, here's the blueprint of something totally different. Let's go with it. So I just wanted to make this video and just thank Ozzy for what he did for my life and for the lives he touched through his music. And I'm going to leave you with a quote I came up with. I don't know if I think I can claim credit for it. And it goes something like this. Ozzy Osbourne may have been the Prince of Darkness, but he brought an immense amount of light into everybody that loved his music. And that's what I'm going to close with, and I want to thank you. Bye bye.